Episode 312, Jared Redick, ballet dancer, choreographer, and educator.
A situation that occurred when we were filming the Nutcracker during COVID.
I'm Mark Graben. This is My Favorite Mistake. In this podcast, you'll hear business leaders and other really interesting people talking about their favorite mistakes. Because we all make mistakes, but what matters is learning from our mistakes instead of repeating them over and over again. So this is the place for honest reflection and conversation, personal growth, and professional success. Visit our website at myfavoritemistakepodcast.com.
To learn more about Jared, for links and more, look in the show notes or go to markgraben.com/mistake312. Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Graben. Our guest today is Jared Redick. He is an award-winning master teacher, choreographer, and coach whose innovative leadership has transformed the global dance community. As a third-generation ballet dancer, Jared has graced the stage with the Boston Ballet, Miami City Ballet, and more. And he now shapes future talent as a full professor and assistant dean of dance at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. So after an illustrious 20-year performance career, Jared transitioned into education. He's directed acclaimed productions like The Nutcracker. He's pioneered equity-focused curriculum updates and earned accolades such as the UNCSA Excellence in Teaching Award, and doing all this while pursuing an MBA. So Jared, it sounds like you're busy. Thanks for being here on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. I'm excited to have a conversation with you and explore my biggest mistake.
Well, not necessarily your biggest, but your favorite.
My favorite mistake.
Sometimes it's one and the same, the favorite and a biggest. So there's a lot we can talk about here today, but as we usually do, first things first, Jared, what's your favorite mistake?
Well, I think my favorite mistake, as you kind of mentioned it in my bio there, was a situation that occurred when we were filming the Nutcracker during COVID. So obviously during COVID, everything shut down. We couldn't do a lot of in-person. We could do no in-person performances. So we decided to take this large production and turn it into a film production. And so a lot of details regarding that, COVID protocols, dancers, people in film, people backstage in production, in our health protocols, all those things had to come together. And so my favorite mistake was that we had everything mapped out very clearly. We had an 8-day shoot schedule. We had 8 days. They were on 4 consecutive weekends. What happened is we got to our second weekend of shooting. Obviously, every day was critical in terms of making our deadline. And we get a couple days before that, and I was informed that the sets were not ready for that shoot for that weekend. So we were missing the entire set for that weekend. So we're like, what do we do in this moment? We only have this 8 days, and we had a hard deadline to hit. Mm-hmm. So we ended up canceling that weekend. And through the process, I talked with some of the other people, the other artistic leaders on the project, and we're like, we have to make up these days somewhere else during this. So we were able to kick it to our last weekend and kind of bookend it. So we were working Friday through Monday. So that mistake was, it produced a lot of anxiety for a lot of people, I should say. Mm-hmm. But once we found the solution, we found a new way forward, and we're like, we should have done this from the beginning. So it really did give us some really interesting insights. There's like, there are other ways that we could have been shooting. We just had to really have a lot of flexibility and a lot of communication regarding that. So losing those 2 days, which could have absolutely tanked the project, because we did have a hard deadline, because we were going to, once we produced it and went to post and the final product was done, that was going to PBS North Carolina. So we had a very hard deadline about when that had to finish. So instead of it tanking, we were able to figure out a solution to preserve the production.
So something good or something better came out of that as a result of the delay, if I hear you right.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we were able to squeeze more time by losing 2 days than
Hmm.
if we hadn't lost those 2 days, because we had to find other time. And once we started digging into that other time, we found, okay, we can actually get extra hours of shooting, which is so critical on a film set. And when you're talking about organizing 100 dancers, and you're dealing with probably 50 people on film production side of things, among other people, it's a monumental task to organize that many people, and then pivot on a dime to find solutions that could be accomplished.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how did you help lead people through the anxiety of the moment into, finding solutions and getting things on a better path? I could see that being stressful.
Yeah. And so I think what happened was, once I was informed that, hey, the sets they haven't even gone into production, they're not going to be ready. Once I heard that, it was like, all right, obviously the first situation of being a little bit aggravated, but then you just take a breath. You take a breath, and then I reached out to the other artistic leaders on the project and was like, all right, here's our situation. How do we do this? And then we started just working through it step by step. What do we need to do? Where could this go? And it wasn't such a difficult thing to find the solution. But in that moment of just frustration and a little bit of panic for a minute,
Mm-hmm.
we did come up with that solution. So really, it came down to talking with the other artistic collaborators,
Yeah.
and working together to find a solution.
Now, the sets not being ready, I mean, it sounds like if they hadn't even started production, that wasn't as simple as, say, a COVID delay where somebody was sick, or it was more of a planning or communication mistake that led to that not being ready.
Both, I think, planning and communication. I think something got lost in translation about when we were shooting those particular scenes over that weekend. And so, again, probably no one's fault, but it just fell through the cracks, where you assume the right hand knows what the left hand is doing, and that just really leads to, there should have been more confirmation, making sure that everyone was ready to go a couple weeks in advance. This is when you're going to hit it. This is when you're going to hit the target. So yeah, so it was a little bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there were lessons learned. Was this whole experience of filming it and recording it this way, was that a one-off production where then things started getting back to normal in terms of being able to do live productions, or were there lessons that could be applied to the planning of any major production?
Well, it was mostly a one-off in terms of the magnitude of that project. So we had to take our entire stage from our opera house that the school has, and put it in the film school. And it was just a huge effort by the entire school to come around that. But in terms of moving forward, it did spawn a bunch of other film projects, and continues to spawn other film projects for the dancers that I work with. So, this is kind of the new landscape that we're in. To be timely right now, you look at Lady Gaga's new video that she just dropped, right? And it's all over TikTok, and it's all over Instagram Reels. Everyone's learning that dance. And so you see this dance is all over the place now. So in terms of being a very valuable exercise for us, it certainly was, because now we want to be in the digital space. We want to make dance more accessible to more people.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the aftermath of that situation, I don't hear you pointing fingers or in suggesting that anybody was like in trouble or punished, or is that a fair assessment of kind of dealing with that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, stuff happens, right? Stuff happens, and we just got to pivot and make things happen. Or if you point fingers, it's just a waste of time and energy. No one's got that, and it's only going to make the situation worse, right? If you're starting like, oh, it's this person's fault, or they missed it. None of that. We were all working together. Everyone wanted it to succeed. It's just something that fell through the cracks, and lesson learned. Make sure we have clearer communication, and that we are really checking and double checking that everyone knows what their target dates are.
Yeah. And, in talking with people, sometimes the pro punishment crowd, which I'm not a part of personally, I agree with you that, the sort of, blame and shame punishment reaction is ultimately counterproductive. But, sometimes people in the punishment camp will say things like, well, if we don't punish them, that just gives people permission to make mistakes in the future. But I mean, it's kind of a leading question, but it's a comment of like, I bet everybody involved felt bad as it was, that there wasn't a need for quote unquote punishment for some sort of learning to happen.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I really think it speaks to leadership, and I think effective leadership. When you're working with a team, you need to know your team, and you need to know everyone's dispositions, right? Is this person someone who's really detail oriented? Is this person who's always ahead of the curve? Maybe they need a little bit more time. Maybe they need more support. Maybe their area is so large and their projects are so big and complex that they need extra support. So it does talk to really understanding your team and supporting them. That's a big lesson that I learned. Like, okay, this is something that I could have done better on that end. And in terms of punishment, it's not intentional, and even if it was, and it wasn't in this instance,
right.
That's up to whoever's guiding, whoever's steering the ship, right? That's their job to make sure that things go right, and learn and then make the adjustment. And you have to be flexible. You have to be able to make those pivots in a very timely way. Fortunately, we weren't dealing with a financial resource limitation in that way, since it's a school, but we were a time limitation or time resource situation. So, no harm, no foul there.
Yeah. One other question, this is just really out of curiosity, just trying to picture the scene of, at what stage of COVID was this? Were the dancers and everybody involved still wearing masks, or was it a matter of making sure, being careful about testing and other precautions?
All of those things. This is at the height of COVID, so we were filming all of the month of October in what was that 2020.
So it was pre-vaccination. Yeah.
Yep. And everyone was masked, and we had health check-ins. No one was allowed on set if you weren't supposed to be there. We had to maintain all of the protocols, and that was its own kettle of fish to deal with, right? How do you manage that and allow people to dance, and then the film crew to be there, and all the bodies that need to be there for safety precautions? So we were right in the thick of things with COVID. We learned a lot, and for anyone who's watching and listening, you can see, because everyone was masked, you can see that production at PBS North Carolina, UNCSA Nutcracker, PBS North Carolina. You can see everyone is masked for the entire production.
So I'll put a YouTube link to that production in the show notes. I'll go check that out. And I mean, not to rehash everything that was going on then, but if these incredibly talented and I'm sure very athletic dancers are able to perform to their peak ability while wearing a mask, I mean, I think anybody could have gotten through the day without complaining. But
and we had a lot of fun with it, right? Because when you're doing a live production, there's no stopping and starting. You just go. You just go top to bottom. But when you're filming things, you get to stop and start, which was fun. But the dancers were working hard. Everyone was adjusting to dancing in masks. That was the protocol. That's what what the requirement was at the time. But the dancers, adapted and adjusted.
Yeah. I'd love this. So thank you for sharing the story and, especially the lessons learned, Jared. As we kind of move into some other topics, I'd love to hear a little bit of your personal story of it. It sounds like dance is, in the family, in the genes. I don't know how you would describe it, but I'm curious, like your sort of, your pathway, was dance something that you naturally took interest in or got kind of steered to, encouraged, or hopefully not discouraged by by family before you?
Yeah, it's all of those things really.
Yeah.
Dance, because I grew up. I have an older brother. He's 3 years older than me. We grew up in the ballet studio. My mom is a ballet teacher,
Mm.
so we grew up from my youngest memories of being in the studio in classes, and then eventually, when we got old enough, we started taking classes. So it's something that I naturally fell into as a young person, very young person. I had a lot of energy, so this was a good outlet for me to go and learn this craft, but also get to fly around the studio and jump around and get some of that energy out. And really, I didn't really commit to it until I got to my high school years,
Mm-hmm.
when I was accepted into a boarding school, which is where I now teach at
Mm-hmm.
UNCSA. So when I went away, that was really a turning point for me, and it was like, okay, this is something that's getting a little more serious. This is conservatory training, and this leads into the profession, directly into the profession, which is what actually happened for me.
So then, I mean, does that mean, is there a sports equivalent to then going pro, coming out of that boarding school, as opposed to continuing, let's say, university dance studies or further conservatory work?
No, it's exactly. I mean, the parallel is like,
Yeah.
because dance and classical ballet in particular it's such a young art form. Just kind of think about like gymnastics in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
You could parallel kind of the going through the high school years as college football,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're still doing performances at this level, but especially particularly good college football program. I won't mention any because I don't want any haters here. Um, but it's like you're like in a college football program, and then from
We'll
there
be
you
back
go
with
pro.
more My Favorite
And
Mistake
that's kind of
just
after you
after
graduate
this.
high school, most professional ballet dancers go right into a company, if they're fortunate to get picked up from a company. Obviously, there are dancers who do do their undergrad and then do go into a company, but it's more because it's such a young art form. I think gymnastics is a better parallel,
Yeah.
and that can be a little bit younger even than dance.
Yeah. So I guess compared to a career in, say, classical music, I guess going into it that you have sort of a shorter expected performing career span to take advantage of.
Yeah, I mean it's just like a pro athlete in that respect. Yeah. You're going to age out. You're going to age out. If you're lucky to get into your late 30s or early 40s, you've had a really long career. There's a few people who've gone longer, but I mean those are really exceptions. You really have to. You just know that there is that clock is ticking. A classical musician can play until they can't play.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, are there rare exceptions? And again, I know more, I'm more conversant in sports and music than I am in dance. But Mikhail Baryshnikov is a famous popular, everybody. When he was, especially at the peak of, 80s and such, he was so famous. Did he have a longer active performing career span, maybe because of the fame, or did he also, do you think, hit some limits at that level?
Well, Baryshnikov, I mean, he is again an anomaly in that respect because the fame. I think it's like with any profession, when you have that kind of fame and that kind of brand and that kind of ability, the resources and the opportunities flow your way. And so he was able to prolong his dancing career because he was able to pick and choose and create his own projects that he could physically manage. So obviously he had his classical ballet career, and then he moved into contemporary work. And then he's moved into photography, and now he has the Baryshnikov Performing Arts Center in New York City. But he was acting too, because I saw him in an off-Broadway play. So, and of course, Sex and the City. Everyone knows him from Sex and the City when he had that role there. So he had all those opportunities rolling his way. So he's more the exception. Because he's just so famous for not just dancing, but also his acting career.
Yeah. In films.
In film,
he was in a film with Gregory Hines.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, another dancer. And
White Nights.
White Nights.
Yeah, White Nights. He was in. I mean, I think he did a couple films.
Yeah. But so, Jared, back to your career, I'm curious to hear then about your own transition from performing to teaching and the things that you're doing now. Was there any sense of struggle or question of when to make that transition, or did you hit a point where you're like, okay, now it's time?
Well, I had a very fortunate transition. Towards certainly the latter part of my career, I started teaching. I've been teaching on when we were not when the company was off. And then right at the end of my career, I was offered the opportunity to run one of Boston Ballet School's satellites. So now I was put in a leadership position, and I was still dancing. So I was doing the two things at the same time. And I did that for a year, and it almost killed me because I was doing two full-time jobs. I mean, they were full-time jobs, a full performing career, and then teaching and working with administrators and faculty and parents and students. And then that kind of indicated to me, this is a good time for me to step off. There's a transition job. I can pivot into something else. And, obviously my body, it wasn't, and it's not 20 anymore. I think I was 38 at the time. Mm-hmm. So that was like, yeah, it's time to let the younger guys do it. Let the younger dancers pick it up at this point. So very fortunate that my transition was fairly seamless.
Yeah. Because that's good to hear. Thinking back to your time, as a performer, and I think it's been I haven't had a dancer on the podcast. I've had some musicians, instrumentalists, and vocalists on the podcast, and athletes, and thinking of people who are performing in front of hundreds or thousands or more, especially if it's being televised. I'm curious what your mindsets were about the possibility of making a mistake as a performer, and how some of the lessons from that maybe help you now as a teacher.
Yeah, I can't. There are very few performances, if any, that I can think that I did not make a mistake at some point during a live performance. But when you're performing live, you have to be in the moment. You cannot. Some things just don't go right. Maybe it's a technical error or whatever it might be. Maybe it's something with a prop, maybe a costume. You can't get in the moment. You can't get hung up on those things. So how I always felt from almost every performance that I had, good or bad, was like, I would always think I need to go back in the studio and work on this some more. So I go back into the process that got me onto the stage. And by doing so, my performances, they got better and better. They improved, because without that self-reflection and that self-assessment, you're not going to go anywhere. And it's also, you want to do better, right? We just naturally want to get better at whatever the thing is that we're working on.
Yeah. So there's that self-assessment, and was there kind of a balance of celebrating, what went well, parts that you nailed versus opportunities for improvement?
Yeah, I think more the former, right? You really want to hopefully at the end of a show, you feel like regardless of how the show, your perception of the show went, that the accomplishment of just getting through an entire evening and leaving it all on the stage, that is an accomplishment. The other things are like, well, I could do this better. I could do that better. Or, maybe I need to work through these entrances or these movements or whatever. But they're definitely, if there was not the joy of just the performing and the kind of a high you get from the adrenaline and the physical exertion and just reaching an audience, really what it is you're communicating with that audience. Am I actually making a difference on stage? Am I bringing anything to them? Am I helping them, maybe have a different experience in the theater versus, their daily lives might be something, and they can come into the theater and they can kind of forget those worries. So there's also that kind of feeling that, I had a really good show. I felt it from the audience. You feel the energy as a performer, a live performer, especially. So,
yeah. So what I hear you saying is a performance that had a couple of technical flaws to it as an artistic endeavor could still be extremely not just entertaining, but impactful to an audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did qualify kind of how I was making that statement, because my reflection of a show might be like, oh, that was not my best. I had so many times where I'm like, oh, I was just not my best today. And those are the shows, a lot of those shows where people would come back, and especially the artistic staff who works with us, being like, that's the best I've seen you dance that. And so there's kind of that disconnect where like, I felt terrible about it, but you're hearing that the people who really know what they're watching are, they're telling you, no, that's not what my experience was. And also audience as well. You know, you're just so tired at the end of the week after doing however many shows, and like, oh, didn't really feel that edge to myself. But, you know, perhaps it was a moment where you were so tired you couldn't overthink it in the moment, and you just kind of went with the preparation.
Yeah.
And maybe it looked more organic to the audience and to those who are watching it.
Interesting. And then I imagine in a professional ballet company, you have other people giving, I guess, kind of specific feedback around here's something to work on. Do you watch or the live performances recorded where you have quote unquote game film to review and evaluate individually or as a group?
Yeah, we have all of those things. So there's obviously the performances are videoed, and you can look at the performances, but you usually get the people who are responsible for whatever work you're doing. They'll be like, if there was something that didn't go quite the way it was supposed to, they give you that feedback live. And if it's something more significant where it's like, okay, we need the entire cast, let's just work through this section that didn't go as planned, as it was supposed to be executed. And you just have little rehearsals around those things. Those are less likely to happen. It's more the feedback about this was really good. Maybe think about this, maybe that, but generally positive, feedback. Every show you get that.
Yeah. So I'd love to ask Jared, as you move into teaching and leading and doing it and studying it as an MBA student. I'm curious your thoughts on kind of developing your own leadership style. How that's influenced by mentors versus your own sense of here's how I should lead.
Yeah, if you're a teacher, you're leading. You can't be at the front of a classroom and not be leading. And people and hopefully teachers, I'm sure they understand that. It's so important that we're responsible for the people we're leading in that classroom. We have to help them engage with the material. So that is up to us. And beyond that, not just in the teaching respect, as assistant dean and have run the department for a year as interim dean here, my leadership style is to help support the faculty, staff, and students that I'm working with. All the people that I am working with, they need to be supported, because when they are successful, that is what needs to happen. And as I was saying earlier, and I probably, lessons learned, right? Mm-hmm. The more support I can give to everybody, the more successful they are, the better the outcomes are for everybody. So I think that is just something that I really focus on. I listen to a lot of Simon Sinek. I think he's brilliant in terms of what he's doing and how he kind of moves through his life and the lessons that he imparts to everybody. So I really like the idea of servant leadership in that way. And some people don't really understand what that means. But if you're leading, you're not ahead of everyone. You're behind everyone, pushing, helping them go forward. You're supporting them and giving them whatever resources that they need to be successful.
Yeah. And another question I wanted to ask, and this is probably more related to the assistant dean role. And I have that correct, right? Assistant dean? I want to make sure I didn't.
That's correct.
If I was going to make a mistake, I should have scrolled back up to my notes and the intro. But one thing kind of listed about the work that you're doing, and it was in your bio. Would love to hear you talk about what's meant by equity-focused curriculum updates and what that means in the world of dance or the arts.
Yeah, and when we're talking about and obviously DI is such a, controversial conversation right now in the political landscape. When we're talking about that is we're looking at ballet is rooted in some very old traditions. And so we just are trying to make sure that the traditions are updated for today. For instance, in general, female body dancers, they wear pink tights in general. The uniform is usually pink tights. But so moving them into being the dancers can choose the color tights that they wear to match their skin tone. So really, we're looking at those kinds of things. We're also looking at how do we make our art form or the arts in general more accessible. How do that is always the big challenge in the arts, because some people have ideas about, especially classical ballet, as being so elitist, but that is not the case. But there might be some socioeconomic issues there, or barriers, and cultural barriers as well. So how do we break down those barriers and make it more accessible to people, and also make people feel comfortable in the space so that they feel like they belong in that space, right? Nothing worse than going into a class feeling like I'm an outsider here, right? How do you change your methodologies to make people feel more welcomed, and that make those people more comfortable?
Yeah. Because, ballet is such a visual art form, such a physical art form. I imagine there are all kinds of questions or opportunities for inclusion, and all three: diversity and equity and inclusion, when it comes to maybe not, it's just all the different ways a dancer might look, including body type and beyond, skin color, and helping people feel welcome to pursue what they want to pursue. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, I think the dance world has done a really good job in the last 5 years in particular, moving that forward. Representation matters, and so making sure that we have as many possibilities for as many dancers as possible.
Yeah. And, again, I'm more able to draw connections to music, and it seems like there's probably not a good parallel where, in music you can do, blind auditions behind a screen to try to eliminate, unconscious bias about a performer based on how they look. It's probably more challenging to try to eliminate some of that bias from something as visual as dance.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you don't have the those blind auditions, which we don't have those. You have to take a class, and they get to see your work. But I think just having the conversations around that is already helping to level the playing field more, making things more equitable for all dancers to come into the space. But again, when you're talking about, for students, it's a little easier. The profession is harder because there are minimum requirements to get into a company, right? It's just like pro sports. You have to be really good. You have to be at that level of excellence to be, get drafted. So in education, it can be a little bit different. Obviously, we want to make those opportunities available, and it should be as available as possible.
Yeah. I'm curious here a little bit. I have an MBA. Coming from an engineering background, so a very different path into that. My path was a lot more traditional. I'm curious what your reflections are on MBA curriculum, and from your background, you might be the only person from the arts career in your program, or I'm just kind of curious what's been most eye-opening or most applicable, kind of coming now into that formal business study as you might apply to the work you're doing now.
Well, I think it's just having different perspectives about different things, right? Because at the end of the day, the arts, there's a business model that underlies the arts. Everything. There's a business, we're in the business of art is what we do. So the MBA is really helping me to focus on all the other external things that need to be underpinning that undergird the artistic enterprise, whether it's educational, in the university system, or whether it's with a company. You need to make sure you have a firm understanding of what is going on in the broader context of the organization. So, for instance, here's a really interesting thing that happened. We were studying one of my last courses. We did a case study about Cirque du Soleil, and the course was about information systems. And Cirque du Soleil has an incredibly involved program that they use to keep track of all their shows worldwide. Mm-hmm. And so that is really interesting. It's project management software, basically, but it's custom. It's custom built project management software, but on such a large scale that it's really helping support the artistic product. Right? They're saving money. They're saving time. They're able to locate talent from all over the world to put people into shows when they might need to pivot or when they're building a new show. So that all of those project management skills are so helpful when you're thinking about, how do you produce a show? And so that's been really helpful, and getting a different perspective about what I'm already doing, but from the business standpoint of it.
That's great. Maybe, as we wrap up, Jared, we can talk a little bit more about mistakes and some of your thoughts and lessons there. What does the phrase, embracing vulnerability mean to you, and how does that help people learn from mistakes?
That's a great question. That is a really great question. Yeah, embracing vulnerability. I think if you are really sincere in pursuing your craft, whatever that might be, there's always going to be those moments of vulnerability when you go into those areas where you're not as strong, whatever that is. So I think if you're a lifelong learner, you have to be in that space of vulnerability. For me, going back to school is an incredibly vulnerable situation. I have been in school in forever, and an MBA is not something that I shied away from, but it's certainly, I do not have a business background, in that respect. So there's a vulnerability there. So I think for our own personal growth, it's so important that we allow ourselves to be vulnerable in that space and ask questions. And I know as adults, we're supposed to have all the answers, and as leaders, we're not supposed to have any of that vulnerability. We know all these things, but I think coming to things with humility really does help the situation, because everything is about communication, and we are human beings, and we need to communicate with each other to find solutions together. And so I think that is really where I come from.
Yeah, that's well said. And I think the word vulnerability gets misunderstood sometimes. So people hear being vulnerable or vulnerability, and they think of that as somehow like a sign, somehow it's weakness. When I think you go back to dictionary definitions of the word vulnerability, means you're exposing yourself to risk.
Yeah.
So by doing something that you're not comfortable with, or doing something that's new or innovative, you are exposing yourself to risk. And I think that takes humility, strength, confidence, however you want to describe it. I think there's a lot of strength in being willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah, and I like you using the word risk in there, because that brings up so many other areas, right? I immediately start thinking about investing, right? When you're talking about investing in risk, what's your risk tolerance, right? What's your vulnerability tolerance, right? And how do we, take calculated risks in that way?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's well said. And different people at different places in their lifespan or in their career or at the stage of a company are certainly going to have a different risk tolerance.
Absolutely.
Very, very, very situational. And I think, in a workplace environment, I think part of that situational risk tolerance comes down to what's your relationship with your leaders? How do they reward intelligent risk taking? How do they react to a quote unquote mistake or a failure? I think we can, I think when our leaders are helping us reframe some of that as an opportunity to now be creative, to do something different. I think back to your favorite mistake story, Jared. I think that reduces the risk and allows people to, to take more chances and ultimately do better things.
I agree. And I think that working for leaders who allow you to take those risks and you feel valued and you feel supported, regardless of outcome, right? Obviously, if you have maybe an outcome that was not projected, to have that support to go, hey, good that you went there. Okay, let's fix what happened, versus like you completely messed up and you're dumb and you're not competent in any of those things. So having those environments where you can do that, and that does come from leadership. And I'm a big proponent of making sure that environment is such that people can explore those areas that are really interesting to them. And the outcomes might be not what they expect, but okay, let's do it and let's learn from it and then move forward.
Well, as we move forward, that's a great point to end on. It's very well said, Jared. So again, our guest today, Jared Redick. He currently is a full professor and assistant dean of dance at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. So as Jared talked about, I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes. I'll find the video on YouTube of that COVID-era Nutcracker production, and there are if we search, I didn't do this, I should have done this before the interview. I'm sure if we search your name, there are some dance highlights from your career on YouTube.
Yeah, you'll find things. They're out there. They're out there for sure.
All right, well, that's great. So Jared, this has been great. I only felt a touch vulnerable of the chance I would ask a dumb question about the world of dance, because that's not my usual domain, but I knew we'd have a great conversation about mistakes, and I appreciate you for doing that.
Oh, no, it's a great conversation. You were right on the money with all of it, so good for you.
Intelligent risks, I guess. So.
Absolutely.
Thanks again.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark.
Thanks again to Jared Redick for being a great guest today. To learn more about him, for links to video and more, go to the show notes or markgraben.com/mistake312. As always, I want to thank you for listening. I hope this podcast inspires you to reflect on your own mistakes, how you can learn from them or turn them into a positive. I've had listeners tell me they started being more open and honest about mistakes in their work. And they're trying to create a workplace culture where it's safe to speak up about problems, because that leads to more improvement and better business results. If you have feedback or a story to share, you can email me, myfavoritemistakepodcast@gmail.com. And again, our website is myfavoritemistakepodcast.com.